So the title of my talk is Adultism and Its Discontents. And I want to talk about a term, adultism, that's been used throughout the academy for many years, over 100 years actually, but some of the different meanings that it can have in relation to our work here, and to contrast it with what I call childism, which for me is analogous to feminism or decolonialism or critical race theory or something like that, which are an attempt to empower children in some way. There is an alternative use of the word childism, but actually in that use, it's used in the same way as what I mean by adultism and what most scholars have meant by adultism. And I suppose I should introduce myself as well. I'm a professor of political philosophy and childhood studies at Rutgers in the US. And I've been writing about children's rights, political rights to vote, for example, and other things like that. Oh, there we are. And I'm also director of something called the Childism Institute, in which we examine issues of childism and adultism in a wider variety of ways as well. So if you could switch to the second slide, that would be great. Okay. So the way that the term adultism has been used, it goes all the way back to 1903, but it's developed what it means. And you can put it into a grid like this to divide up different ways of thinking about adultism. And in a broad sense, adultism simply means bias against children in favor of adults. The kind of bias that puts children in a secondary position to adults in across different parts of life. But the way the term started out was, it really just meant the domination of adults over children or the misuse of power, which is a way of thinking about adultism that's both direct and interpersonal. So the idea of adultism there is simply that individual adults sometimes dominate over individual children, or groups of adults over groups of children in a fairly direct way. But moving over to the right, disrespect, which Bell and Checkaway and others started to develop in the 1990s, people started to think about adultism differently as a more indirect, or you could call it normative, problem facing children, meaning that adultism is built into the assumptions and frameworks that structure societies. So there's a kind of generalized disrespect for children that they were trying to point to in the 1990s, where people were second-class citizens, not just treated individually that way, but more broadly in that sense. And then in the 2000s, moving down to the bottom left here, another idea got developed of adultism as oppression and discrimination of children or against children. And here, the idea is that that adultism is systemic, which means that it's a power relation between adults and children, so that adults have various structures of power that allow them to discriminate against children and to keep children's ideas and voices and agency under check. But I and others like Musa Mitha, Tanu Biswas, and a number of others coming out of childism, this work in childism we've been doing, have tried to come up with a more complex way of understanding adultism as marginalization, which combines an indirect and normative way of understanding it with a systemic power dynamic and understanding it. So on this interpretation, adultism is a kind of interpersonal or systemic way in which social systems indirectly keep children from being even heard or seen in the social sphere. So marginalization refers to making invisible, pushing to the edges of the screen or of the page, rendering the experiences that children have as children invisible, and creating assumptions that invisibly help adults to be empowered over children. So Musa Mitha describes this as children are not yet citizens in a broad sense of citizenship. I've described this as the ways in which children are imagined or pre-constituted as not really quite being fully human in a way. And Tanu Biswas has used decolonial theory to kind of think about the way that children are infantilized, and that kind of infantilization also funds a lot of other infantilizations of other groups as well. So if you can go to the next slide, I'll attempt to be slightly less theoretical here. So the question then becomes, how can you be discontent about adultism if it's so problematic, if it's a form of actual invisibilization or marginalization of children as children, in which adulthood is the norm that measures everything in children's lives and adults' lives. And so how would you do that? It wouldn't quite be enough to, for example, encourage children's agency and voices, which is the normal childhood studies way of thinking about children, thinking about how to include children. And that's because children's agency and voices are individual. It doesn't get at the systemic and normative problems that are faced by children being seen and heard in a society. It also wouldn't quite be enough to promote respect for children as children, because respect deals with the normative problem of seeing children as important members of society, but it doesn't really deal with the power structures that keep children from actually being able to engage in their environments in the face of the power that adults have over their lives. And then it wouldn't even quite come down to fighting for children's liberation from oppression either, because that captures the systemic side, but not the normative side as much. Child liberationists have taken this approach, but it has the problem of, while it confronts issues of power, it neglects the way in which there are shared social assumptions that construct childhood as already less valuable and important. Children's experiences are already less valuable and important than adults' experiences. So building on all of that history and all that work, childism is trying to take another step further. And it's the kind of step that something like, for example, third wave feminism took over second wave feminism, where the idea was not to merely lift up the voices and agency of either women or children, but to actually change the normative environments that keep those voices marginalized in the first place. So to respond to, in this case, children's lived experiences and the ways those are kept silent and invisible. So this approach, it takes children's lives and lived experiences as the starting point and attempts to find ways to empower those, to enable them to change social environments, change assumptions, respond to power, and include themselves in the broader understandings of what it means to be human, to have rights, to be a member of society. And then the attempt is to deconstruct historical adult-child binaries. So when it looks at the ways in which adulthood and childhood are constructed differently, and of course this varies enormously across different environments and different cultures and different societies, but in one way or another, this binary opposition of child and adult usually operates to disempower children and measure childhood against adulthood. And so how is that happening? How can we undo that kind of normative problem? And then finally, a childish way of being discontent would also try to reconstruct social relations. It would build on the lived experiences of children in ways that can change social imaginations, change the ways that people understand what children are and how they are in a society. So this is a process of transforming shared imaginations that childism tries to undertake in response to the ways that children's lives are pushed to the margins. So we go to the next slide. Play can be a good example of this, how to think about play. And there are all kinds of adultistic problems around understanding children and play. One of them is that play can be understood as just one particular type of human activity. Often one that's only practiced by children, or one that's characteristically practiced by children, or one that maybe adults practice as well, but when they do it, they have to be like children. So the problem with this is that play is then reduced down to something specific that people do, as opposed to something that humans share in common with each other, something that adults and children in many diverse and different ways might all engage in it, but in different ways. And the other problem with that is that it might reduce children's play in particular to one kind of thing, so that when you think children's play, you think of a certain type of activity or a certain kind of thing that you then sort of try to force children to engage in. Another problem with adultistic ideas of play is that it can be understood as a norm only for children. So it can be used to create a binary opposition between children and adults. So that one might think that children are inherently playful beings in some way, and then they grow out of it and become adults. And adults are inherently non-playful beings, or serious beings, or whatever it might be that you think is the opposite of play. And the problem there is that if you create this bifurcation between children and adults, then it's very hard to develop an understanding of play as not as something that children and adults can connect on, that is part of the being of children and adults, so that we're in a certain sense all playing in a way. We all play all the time. In fact, now we're playing. Doing work is playing, and playing is doing work. It might be that play is something more basic than just a particular activity or something that only children do. And then another problem can be that you can understand play as something that needs to be liberated from adulthood, adult control, so that play is a kind of authentic human existence that adults are stamping out, and that power structures are preventing this original human experience from being realized. So from a childish point of view, those are all okay, but they're not quite getting us to the root of the problem. And the root of the problem is how to understand play as something that connects us as humans and is basic to human being, and maybe to nature, maybe to the universe. I don't know, maybe atoms play, I'm not sure. But just sticking to human beings, is there a way to think about play that learns from children and also in which it can learn from adults as well? So I've been arguing that play is this basic aspect of human nature, which consists in a capacity for creativity, imagination, transformation, back and forth, to and fro, engaging with difference and otherness, enabling meaning to be created out of new ideas, and to enable a play of the space between people and objects, and between people and nature, that opens up imaginations and opens up new possibilities for meaning. And if that's what play is, then it's something that we actually all do all the time, possibly. It's kind of a dimension of human nature, rather than a particular activity that some people do, or something that only children are good at. And so this brings us back to this idea of empowerment, which is what childism is attempting to do. So play then can be understood as something that actually empowers people to engage in the creation and recreation of their lives, the creation and recreation of meaning with others, or by themselves, or in relation to nature, or whatever it might be. But if play is understood as this empowering capacity that humans have, then that means a couple of things. One thing it means is that children themselves probably play in a very wide diversity of ways, and things that may look like play activities are going to be play, but then also things that don't look like play activities are going to be play as well. I don't know if you consider reading a book a play or not, or doing your homework, or eating dinner, or something like that. I suppose we're not told not to play with our food, but play is if play is this activity of creating meaning in our lives, then it has a broader definition than just things that look like play, or have been adultistically constructed as play, because it's something that children characteristically do. And the other thing that it suggests is that not only can children learn about play from adults, and have things that adults teach them about play, or help them to learn about play, or establish environments in which children can explore play, but the opposite is also the case, that children can teach adults about play. And not only adults, but societies, politicians, political discussions, or cultural meaning, or things of that nature, so that not only can children's voices then be sort of liberated to be heard by adults, and adults can be impacted by children, but adults can actually learn what it means to create a meaningful life, in part from children. I'm not trying to say that children live in some idyllic existence where they know more about that than adults. I just mean that in our current situation of adultism, children's way of creating meaning in life tends to be viewed as not as important as adult ways of creating meaning in life. And so part of play is this interactive play between adults and children, in which adults have something to learn about not only the specific activity, but the actual meaning of play. So then play becomes a way of empowering children's lived experiences. Playing with children is a way of actually helping children to transform these structures and norms that keep them from playing. So that there's a kind of circularity there to this idea of play. So you can go to the last slide, and I just want to say, thank you for having me here. I know this is very theoretical, but if you want to learn more about childism, there's the Childism Institute website there. I look forward to hearing any comments you have or any discussion. Thanks.